The last thing Ava heard from her family was not an apology, a warning, or even a goodbye. It was laughter. Standing alone in the middle of a deserted Tennessee rest stop, with rain pouring over her face and the sound of her mother's car disappearing into the distance, Ava finally understood the truth. The people she trusted most had just abandoned her for entertainment. The red glow of Diane's taillights faded into the storm as Ava stood frozen beside the empty highway. Inside that car were her mother, her father Mark, her brother Tyler, and her sister Brooke, celebrating what they called a harmless joke. They were laughing, making bets, convinced that Ava would break down before the night was over. $10,000 says she won't make it 24 hours, Tyler had joked. Those words echoed louder than the thunder above her. At 22 years old, Ava had spent her entire life believing her family was protecting her. Diane always told her she was too sensitive, too trusting, too fragile for the real world. Every decision was made for her. Every mistake became proof that she needed them. Ava thought it was love. But standing there alone, with nothing except the clothes she was wearing, she realized it had never been protection. It had been a cage. The rain soaked through her clothes as she searched her empty pockets. No phone. No wallet. No money. No way to call anyone. The nearest road stretched endlessly in both directions, and the fading daylight made the highway feel even more unfamiliar. Ava slowly walked toward the small rest area bench and sat down, trying to convince herself that this was still some cruel misunderstanding. Maybe they would come back. Maybe Diane would realize how far they had taken the joke. But minutes passed. Then an hour. Nothing. The cold metal bench beneath her reminded her of every moment she ignored. Every time her family laughed at her dreams. Every time they made her feel incapable of standing on her own. She remembered how Diane would call it toughening her up, while secretly making sure Ava never gained enough confidence to leave. Now there was no one telling her what she could or couldn't do. Only the empty highway, the storm, and the terrifying question sitting in her mind. Could she survive the night? The family who raised her believed she would fail the moment they let go. They were waiting for her to crawl back, embarrassed and defeated. But they didn't know something yet. The girl they left behind in the rain was not the same person they thought they were abandoning. Ava had no idea where the road would lead, but standing still meant accepting defeat. With every step away from the rest stop, the reality of her situation became heavier. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, trucks rushed past with powerful winds, and every unfamiliar sound made her body tense. She kept moving along the shoulder, holding on to the only thing she still had, her determination to prove she was not the person they believed her to be. The empty road brought back memories she wished she could forget. A faded mile marker on the side of the highway stopped her in her tracks. The sight of that old sign reminded her of a summer barbecue months earlier, a day she thought was filled with family happiness. She remembered standing near the grill helping clean up after everyone ate. Uncle Ray's loud laughter filled the backyard while Tyler proudly talked about the bet like it was a funny story. Brooke covered her mouth, laughing along, while Diane smiled and raised her glass, calling it a lesson that Ava needed to learn. Ava remembered smiling back, unaware that the people around her were planning the moment they would break her. The memory faded as a truck slowed beside her. For a second, fear took over. She stepped back, unsure of what would happen next. But the driver, a middle-aged man named Hank, lowered his window and noticed her exhausted face, wet clothes and frightened expression. He did not ask questions that made her feel ashamed. He simply looked at her and asked if she needed help. Hank offered her an old jacket from the passenger seat and a small disposable camera he kept in his truck. He told her to hold on to it and capture whatever happened next because someday she might want proof of how far she came. Ava held the camera carefully, almost forgetting what kindness felt like. With trembling fingers, she took her first picture. It was not a perfect photo. Her hair was soaked, her face showed fear, and the highway behind her looked endless. But it was proof. Proof that she was still standing. After Hank drove away, Ava continued forward, feeling a small spark of strength returning. Then the sky opened again. Heavy rain crashed down without warning, covering the road in darkness. Her shoes slipped against the wet gravel and she fell hard onto the ground. Pain shot through her hands as she pushed herself back up. For one terrifying moment, Diane's voice returned to her mind. You can't handle the real world. But Ava looked at the jacket around her shoulders, the camera in her hand, and the road ahead. For the first time she wondered if maybe the problem was never that she was weak. Maybe she had just spent years surrounded by people who wanted her to believe she was. After hours of walking, hunger became harder to ignore than the fear. Ava's legs felt heavy, her clothes were still damp, and every step reminded her that she was completely alone. When she finally saw the glowing sign of a small roadside diner, it felt like a miracle. The warm lights shining through the windows looked like the first safe place she had seen all day. She pushed open the door quietly, unsure if she even belonged there. The smell of coffee and fresh food filled the room. A waitress named Sarah immediately noticed her tired eyes, dirty shoes, and the way she kept looking toward the entrance like she was expecting someone to find her. Instead of asking uncomfortable questions, Sarah simply placed a menu in front of her and said she could have a meal on the house. That simple act almost broke Ava. She sat in a worn booth near the window, holding a warm cup of coffee between her hands. The cracked leather seat beneath her triggered another painful memory. It reminded her of old family road trips where she thought everyone was having fun, but now she saw those moments differently. She remembered Tyler laughing as he drove away from a gas station, pretending he forgot she was still inside. She remembered running after the car while everyone treated it like a harmless joke. She remembered Diane watching and saying Ava needed to toughen up. At the time, Ava forced herself to laugh because she wanted to be part of the family. Now she wondered how many times she had mistaken cruelty for love. As Sarah brought her food, Ava noticed a small camera sitting beside her bag. She looked at the photos she had taken and suddenly realized the truth was much bigger than one terrible night. The rest stop prank was not random. It was the final piece of a pattern that had been building for years. Diane had slowly convinced her she was incapable. Tyler enjoyed seeing her struggle. Brooke joined in because making Ava feel small made everyone else feel powerful. The realization hit harder than the exhaustion. Ava lowered her head, tears falling into her coffee as Sarah sat nearby and shared her own story about walking away from people who claimed to love her but only wanted control. Family is supposed to make you feel safe, Sarah told her, not make you afraid of failing. Those words stayed with Ava. Before she could respond, she noticed a customer across the diner watching her too closely. His eyes followed every movement, making her instincts rise again. After everything she had been through, she knew better than to ignore danger. Her hand tightened around the camera. She had lost her home, her comfort, and the illusion of her family's love. But she was starting to find something they never expected her to have. The strength to see the truth. The storm rolled in fast, swallowing the highway in sheets of rain, forcing Ava beneath a concrete overpass where the wind still cut through like blades. Thunder cracked overhead, shaking loose dust and old paint from the structure above her. She pressed herself against the cold wall, trying to steady her breathing, but something already inside her had begun to fracture in a different way. A faded graffiti phrase above her caught her attention. "You are stronger." The words didn't comfort her at first. They triggered something buried deeper than exhaustion. A sharp memory surfaced without warning, night before everything changed. The kitchen. Quiet smiles that didn't reach eyes. Diane pulling her close in a tight hug that felt rehearsed, not warm. On the table nearby, an envelope thick with cash sat half hidden under a magazine. Mark stood near the doorway, saying nothing, while Tyler and Brooke exchanged looks that carried excitement they tried to hide. Ava remembered thinking it was just another family moment she didn't fully understand. Now it made perfect sense. Nothing about that night had been casual. The storm above her intensified, matching the pressure building inside her chest. Lightning split the sky and something in Ava snapped loose. She pushed herself to her feet, voice breaking free before she could stop it. Her scream echoed under the overpass, swallowed and thrown back by concrete and wind. It wasn't just anger. It was release, grief, confusion, every piece of trust collapsing at once. Her hands trembled as she leaned forward, breathing hard, rainwater dripping from her hair as if the sky itself was exhausted with her. Headlights appeared in the distance. For a moment, fear returned sharply. She stepped back, unsure whether to hide or run. The vehicle slowed instead of passing. It pulled over near the edge of the shelter, engine cutting off. Two figures stepped out, an older couple moving carefully through the storm. They introduced themselves as the Parkers. Their voices were calm, unthreatening. No questions pressed too hard. No judgment hidden beneath concern. Just simple acknowledgement that she shouldn't be out here alone in weather like this. Within minutes, they insisted on paying for a small roadside motel nearby. Ava tried to refuse, but her voice failed halfway through. As they drove her through rain-slick roads, she stared out the window, watching the storm blur into streaks of silver and black. For the first time since everything began, she didn't feel completely invisible. Later, standing outside the motel room, she lifted the disposable camera and captured the storm still raging behind her. The image froze lightning mid-strike, framing her silhouette against chaos. It wasn't peace yet, but it was proof she had survived long enough to keep going. The motel room was quiet in a way that felt too sharp, like even the silence had edges. Ava stood near the small mirror above the sink, holding a cheap metal room key that still felt cold against her palm. The flickering light above her made everything look slightly unreal, like she was watching someone else try to breathe through exhaustion. She barely recognized her reflection at first. Hair tangled, eyes tired, face marked by long hours on the road and everything she couldn't put into words. For a moment she just stared, not judging, just observing how far she had drifted from the version of herself that once believed everything her family said. Then a memory hit without warning. Not loud, not dramatic, worse in a quiet way. Diane sitting at a table, flipping through pages of Ava's private journal. Reading lines out loud in a soft, mocking tone. Smiling at moments that were never meant to be shared. Calling it guidance, like exposing her thoughts was a form of care. The room in that memory had felt safe on the surface, but something about it had always been off, like her privacy never really belonged to her. Ava gripped the sink tighter. Back in the present, she leaned closer to the mirror. The person staring back didn't feel fragile anymore. There was something harder forming behind her eyes, something unfamiliar but steady. "No more," she whispered, almost testing the words. They didn't shake this time. For a brief moment she thought about the early years again. Small fragments of childhood that used to feel warm. Laughter at dinner, family trips, little promises that sounded real when she was too young to question them. But now those memories didn't sit cleanly in her mind. They overlapped with control, decisions made for her, choices quietly removed before she even knew she had them. The good and the wrong were tangled together in a way that made her uneasy. Later that night the room grew darker and sleep didn't come easily. Every sound outside felt louder than it should have. A car passing in the distance. A door closing somewhere down the hallway. Then footsteps, slow, uneven, stopping near her door. Ava sat up instantly. Her breathing tightened as she listened, counting seconds that felt longer than they should. Nothing knocked. Nothing spoke. But the presence was enough to keep her fully awake, staring at the thin wall between her and the unknown. Eventually silence returned. Exhaustion pulled her under, but even in sleep her mind didn't rest. Dreams twisted into fragments of voices she recognized. Laughter she didn't want to hear again, names spoken like they were jokes, decisions being made without her in the room. She woke just before sunrise, heart racing, sheets tangled around her legs. For a few seconds she didn't move. Then she sat up slowly, pressing her hand to her chest, grounding herself in the present. Something had changed overnight. The confusion wasn't gone, but it was organizing itself into clarity. Piece by piece the pattern was becoming harder to ignore. And for the first time she wasn't just surviving it. She was starting to see it. The road felt different as Ava crossed into Kentucky, like the air itself carried more weight. The welcome sign stood near the highway, bright paint faded by time, but for her it became a trigger instead of a milestone. The moment she passed it, something inside her cracked open again. A memory hit her all at once. Not scattered, not soft, but fully formed, like it had been waiting. Diane sitting in the driver's seat, smiling through the rearview mirror as if nothing serious was happening. Tyler holding up his phone, recording everything like it was entertainment. Brooke laughing beside him, clapping like it was some kind of game. Mark leaning back calmly, voice steady as he said she would come running back crying before the day ended. At the time, Ava had believed she was just being challenged. Now she understood she had been discarded for amusement. Her steps slowed, then stopped completely. The weight of it all pressed down until her knees gave out. She fell into the grass beside the highway, hands shaking as everything she had been holding together finally broke apart. The sound that came out of her wasn't controlled or quiet. It was raw, pulled straight from everything she had buried just to keep moving. Cars rushed past on the road, unaware or unwilling to notice. Time blurred while she stayed there, breathing uneven, staring at the ground like it might give her an answer that made sense of any of it. Later, when the storm inside her eased slightly, she noticed a small farm stand a short walk away. She didn't plan to go, but her body moved anyway. An older woman named Ruth stood behind the counter, arranging fruit in neat rows. She looked up, saw Ava's condition and didn't ask invasive questions. Instead she simply handed her a few apples. Ava hesitated, then accepted them. Ruth listened while Ava spoke in broken pieces, not correcting, not interrupting. Just present. After a while she unfolded a simple paper map and placed it on the counter, pointing gently toward the next stretch of road. Then she said something that stayed with Ava longer than anything else. Some families don't deserve their daughters. Ava didn't respond right away. She lifted the disposable camera instead and took a photo of Ruth. No posed smile, just quiet understanding in her eyes. That image felt different from all the others. Not proof of survival but proof of being seen. When she stepped back onto the highway, the world didn't feel lighter, but something inside her had shifted enough to keep going. Then without warning, a car came too fast around the curve. It swerved near the shoulder, missing her by a narrow distance, wind dragging hard against her body as it passed. Ava stumbled backward, heart racing, gripping the camera tightly. And even though fear hit hard again, she didn't stop walking. The highway turned quieter after that point, stretching into long rural roads where traffic thinned and the sky stayed heavy and gray. Everything felt slower, like the world itself had stepped back and left Ava alone with her thoughts. Her steps had started to hurt more than before. Blisters formed where her shoes rubbed, and every incline along the roadside added pressure to her already exhausted legs. Still, she kept moving forward, refusing to stop even when her body begged for rest. At one point, she paused under a small tree to catch her breath and accidentally pulled out an old photo saved in her pocket. It was a picture of her grandmother. Just seeing her face brought back something she hadn't felt in a long time. Warmth. But it quickly turned painful. She remembered how Diane slowly pushed her away from Grandma over the years. Small excuses, cancelled visits, silent tensions that grew until the connection faded completely. Grandma was the only person who ever told Ava she wasn't limited, that she could build her own life without fear. That voice now felt distant, almost like it belonged to another version of her life. Along the road, a few strangers stopped with small gestures, offering water, snacks, even short rides for a few miles before letting her continue on foot. None of them stayed long, but each interaction left something behind. A reminder that not everyone tried to control or break her. Ava started speaking softly into the disposable camera as if it could listen. She didn't know why she did it at first. Maybe to keep herself from feeling too alone. Maybe to hold on to her thoughts before they slipped away. Her voice cracked at times, but it also grew steadier the more she talked. She described what she saw, what she felt, and what she was beginning to understand about her family. Hours passed like that, one step after another, with the camera becoming less like a device and more like a silent witness to everything she was surviving. By late afternoon, pain shot through her ankle after a misstep on uneven ground. She winced, nearly collapsing, but forced herself upright again. The road ahead still looked long, but something in her had changed. Every photo she took felt less like documentation and more like proof that she was still choosing to move forward, no matter how slow or painful it became. The road signs started to feel familiar again as Ava entered Ohio. At first it should have felt like relief, like she was getting closer to something safe. Instead it felt heavier. Every exit carried echoes of old moments she had tried to forget. She passed places where plans had once been promised and then suddenly cancelled without explanation. Doors that had been locked in her face as a joke came back in fragments of memory, each one sharper than the last. What once seemed random now looked intentional, like every small disappointment had been shaping her for something she never agreed to. The more miles she covered, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a family that misunderstood her. It was a pattern of keeping her small, correcting her confidence, making her doubt her own direction so she would always depend on them. The realization didn't come all at once. It built slowly, like pressure gathering under her skin. By afternoon, Ava's pace slowed near a quiet roadside stop where a woman with a child sat resting. The mother noticed her tired face and offered a simple share of food without hesitation. They sat together for a few minutes in silence before the woman spoke gently. "You're already winning by walking this far." The words didn't sound dramatic, but they stayed with Ava longer than expected. She nodded slightly, unable to explain everything she was carrying, but grateful for the kindness that asked for nothing in return. When she stood up again, the sky had started shifting. The light began fading faster, casting long shadows across the highway. Each step forward now carried a different feeling, part fear, part certainty. She was close. Too close to ignore it anymore. The idea of reaching her family again didn't feel like homecoming. It felt like stepping into a truth she had been avoiding her entire life. Her chest tightened with every passing mile, not just from exhaustion but from what was waiting at the end. So she didn't stop. The road ahead pulled her forward, even as doubt and anger tangled together inside her. Whatever she would find there, she was no longer the same person who had been left behind. Dawn arrived quietly, washing the highway in pale light that didn't feel warm, only revealing. Ava was already on the road before the sky fully changed, her body moving on instinct more than strength. Every step hurt sharper than the last. Her feet were raw, her legs unsteady, and even breathing felt uneven, like her body was running out of agreement with her will. But she didn't stop. Something inside her had shifted during the night. The fragments of memory she had been carrying no longer felt scattered. They were starting to align like broken pieces finally clicking into place. The way her family laughed too easily. The way decisions were made without her voice. The way her struggles were treated like entertainment instead of concern. It wasn't random anymore. It was calculated. Ava realized the so-called prank wasn't just a moment of cruelty. It was satisfaction. Relief even. As if proving she could be abandoned and still fail was the outcome they wanted all along. The thought hit harder than exhaustion. Not because it surprised her but because it confirmed what she had been avoiding accepting. Her hands tightened around the camera as she walked. Pain pulsed through her blisters with every step, but instead of slowing her down, it sharpened her focus. She wasn't moving just to survive the road anymore. She was moving because she finally understood what she was moving away from. Her breathing steadied slightly, not from relief but from clarity. Inside her mind, something stronger began replacing everything that had been taken from her. Confidence, direction, identity. It wasn't loud. Didn't need to be. It was firm. The camera hanging by her side carried 36 images now. Each frame held something different. Moments of kindness from strangers, stretches of road she had crossed alone, and evidence of everything she endured without breaking. They weren't just pictures anymore. They were proof. Proof that she had been left behind and still kept going. Proof that while some people measured her worth as failure, others had shown her small truths of compassion along the way. The road ahead still looked long, but collapse was no longer the outcome she expected. Even if her body gave out, something inside her had already decided it wouldn't end in defeat. The front door opened without hesitation. Ava stepped inside like she still belonged there, even though everything in her life had changed. The house looked the same but the air in the kitchen felt tight like it was holding its breath. Conversations stopped the moment she appeared. Diane, Mark, Tyler, and Brooke were gathered around the table. The $10,000 sat in the center, neatly stacked, treated like proof of something they believed they had already won. Their expressions shifted the second they saw her. Mud on her shoes, exhaustion on her face, and a silence that didn't match what they expected. Ava didn't speak at first. She calmly opened her bag and placed the printed photographs across the table one by one. Images of long roads, empty highways, nights spent outside, small moments of help from strangers. Proof that she kept moving even when everything around her was meant to make her stop. No decoration, no exaggeration, just reality captured in frames they couldn't ignore. The room went still. Then her voice came out steady, low, and clear. "You lost the bet. I didn't break. I'm not coming back." Diane reacted immediately, stepping forward with shaking hands and forced emotion, trying to pull her back into old patterns. Tyler started speaking over her, words rushing out without control. Mark avoided eye contact completely, staring at the table. Brooke's face crumbled, but it no longer reached Ava the way it once would have. None of it mattered anymore. Not the explanations. Not the panic. Not the sudden change in their behavior. Ava turned slightly, gripping the duffel she had kept ready. It felt lighter than it should have, like something had already been left behind long before she walked through the door. At the threshold she stopped once. Not to reconsider but to make it final. "If you try to reach me again or twist what happened, I'll make sure the truth is known." Her tone carried no anger now. Only certainty. Then she walked out. Outside the light felt different. Brighter, sharper, almost unfamiliar after everything she had been through. She stood still for a moment, breathing in air that no longer felt controlled by anyone else. Life didn't instantly become easy. It became hers. A small place of her own. Quiet days that no longer needed permission. Steps forward that didn't require approval. What they tried to take from her didn't stay gone. What stayed was her.